Over the years, many women have asked me how I transitioned from the translation industry into tech sales. They ask how I made the move, how I broke in, how I changed industries. But almost no one asked the question that mattered even more. How did I stay? How did I stay when everything about the environment was unfamiliar? How did I stay when I no longer felt like the most confident version of myself? How did I stay when the transition itself triggered an identity crisis I did not have language for at the time? That is what this episode is about. Because making the transition is one thing, staying through the disorientation that comes after it is something else entirely. Welcome to 1-800-GOAL-DIGGER. This is a space for honest conversations about ambition, identity, growth, and the ugly truth that lives underneath becoming the women we say we want to be. If you're building a bigger life and figuring out who you are inside of it, you are in the right place. Let's dive into today's episode. About 6 years ago, I made a major career move. I left the translation industry and entered tech sales. At the time, I was working at a small translation agency, a close-knit group of about 35 people. I was selling translation and localization solutions that were already heavily assisted by technology. Because of my background in teaching and linguistics, I understood that world deeply. I understood the work, the client needs, and the value of what I was selling. I had built credibility in that environment. And from the outside, the move into tech sales probably looked exciting, strategic even. And it was. I could see where the market was going. Technology was becoming integral to how companies grow, compete, and create value. I wanted to build my career closer to that center of gravity. I wanted to be in a space with greater scale, bigger margin, stronger commercial upside, and more room for my own growth to compound. So yes, the move made sense, but what made sense on paper did not feel simple in real life. Because no one really talks about what happens after the transition. What no one tells you is that sometimes the hardest part is not learning the new industry. The hardest part is learning who you are inside of it. I went from being a fish in a small pond to stepping into a big ocean. And that may sound inspiring, but in real life, it was terrifying. It was terrifying because I have never done it before. It was terrifying because the learning curve is steep, and at times it feels like drinking from a fire hose. It was terrifying because I was one of the few women on the team. It was terrifying because the people around me come from very different social and economic backgrounds, and I start to realize what feels natural to them doesn't always feel natural to me. That was part of my experience. I entered a larger, more established environment and realized very quickly that I could not show up in exactly the same way I had before. Not because I needed to become someone fake, but because the context had changed. The stakes had changed. The room had changed. And in many ways, I had changed too. Or at least I was in the process of changing. That is where the identity crisis began. Not in some dramatic cinematic way, but in quieter moments. Moments of feeling intimidated, moments of feeling behind, moments of wondering whether I belonged in that room at all, moments of trying to be myself while quietly realizing I was no longer fully sure what that meant in this new environment. I think that part deserves more honesty because growth doesn't always feel empowering while it is happening. Sometimes it feels disorienting. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it feels like your ambition has carried you into a life your identity hasn't caught up to. But I stayed. Not because it felt easy, not because I always felt confident. I stayed because I was tenacious. I navigated the learning curve with discipline. I kept going even when the product knowledge felt daunting, even when the industry language felt unfamiliar, even when I had to absorb more information than I thought I could hold. And I did something else that mattered just as much. I sought guidance, not from just one mentor, but from multiple mentors. I found people who could help me think, people who could challenge me, people who could normalize what I was experiencing, and people who could help me see further than I could see on my own. Those conversations became a source of light for me. They gave me perspective. They gave me language. They gave me proof that feeling stretched did not mean I was failing. And I think that is something more women need to hear. You do not always navigate a major transition by becoming instantly fearless. Sometimes you navigate it by staying open, by asking questions, by finding people who can help you hold your perspective while you're still building confidence. This is the part I wish more people talked about. We spend so much time talking about how to pivot, how to reinvent yourself, how to break into a new industry, how to make the leap. But we talk far less about what it means to remain, to stabilize, to grow roots in unfamiliar ground, to flourish after the novelty of transition has worn off. Because arriving is not the same as belonging, and belonging is not the same as flourishing. Flourishing takes time. It takes resilience. It takes self-awareness. It takes the willingness to be a beginner again without letting that beginner season define your worth. And for women especially, I think this matters. Because sometimes we enter new rooms carrying more than ambition. We also carry the weight of being one of the few, the weight of class difference, the weight of trying to decode a culture that wasn't built with us in mind. And still we learn, we adapt, we build range, we find our footing. Not all at once, but over time. What I know now is this: the transition is not the whole story. What happens after the transition matters just as much. How you stay matters. How you learn matters. How you support yourself in the unfamiliar matters. How you keep going when you do not yet feel fully formed in the new environment matters. I didn't stay because I had everything figured out. I stayed because I was willing to keep becoming. I stayed because I let tenacity carry me when confidence was still catching up. I stayed because I let mentors help me see through the fog. I stayed because somewhere underneath all the discomfort, I knew the move was still right. And sometimes that is enough. Not clarity, not mastery, just enough conviction to keep going. If you're in the middle of a transition right now, or if you have recently entered a new chapter and quietly found yourself wondering why it feels harder than you expected, I want to say this with clarity. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not failing. You're simply in the part no one talks about. The part where the move has already happened, but your identity hasn't caught up. The part where you're learning how to stay. The part where you're learning how to become someone new without abandoning yourself entirely. That part is real, and that part counts. So yes, make the move, take the leap, build a bigger life, but also prepare to stay, prepare to learn, prepare to seek guidance. Prepare to feel stretched before you feel solid. Because that is often where the real transformation begins. This is 1-800-GOLD-DIGGER, and I will talk to you in the next episode.